it's a typical reaction of people when you invite them to come to rest or to stop talking, just be quiet. They say, "Oh, I am quiet, I am resting," without really realizing that there are levels of rest, levels of silence, levels of stillness. And we really have little concept of the potential of how deeply these things go. It's like looking at the sky. Where does it end? The infinite we talk of, without really grasping how can one grasp it? Of course one cannot, can one? And similarly, when we consider our absence from the presence, or this very useful but unfashionable little word, sin, it's hard to really grasp the depth of our sin. How deeply lost we are. Perhaps this present attention on the state of the world is giving people an idea, perhaps as never before, how the influence of this, of man, the corrupting influence of man has spread to not only ourselves but all of creation. And this is, it all comes back to me. Who is to blame for all this? And we'll come to see more and more that the only one really to blame is this first primal stepping away from, turning away from light to darkness, which of course starts with me. And this is, I am the first of sinners. This is a most helpful statement to take on board, that we won't like it. And we'll say, but what about the others? They're much worse than me. As it really is. I told you how much I learned in Russia when I started to investigate orthodoxy. And it's absolute key theme, which is repeated several times in every Orthodox service. I am the first of sinners, or rather, sin of whom I am the first. And this applies to every one of the multitude that say this. Because it all starts with me. Either I have that vision of oneness, in which there is no division, or I, from my fallen perspective, look out on a world of problems. It's me that does this. So I am the one who both am the cause of all this division, and I, which you may glimpse in the depth of meditation when you let go of the separation, I am the one, undivided one. The same thing, isn't it? The same being. So this is the scale of man, from the divine to the demonic. The demonic being when he is totally dominated by absence from God, which is darkness, part of darkness. This is the work, to turn from darkness to light. Because I suppose if we could grasp this on our first day, of course we can't. It's something that dawns on us very gradually. Whether in this life we ever really grasp the full significance, well, I don't know. But have no doubts that the work is very great. And the responsibility is awesome. The responsibility on each one of us is very great. Really, it's from God to the devil, isn't it? The devil being life, live, L-I-V-E, spelt backwards. Evil. In other words, this reversal from light to darkness. But when we turn back to the One, what happens to all the luggage we carry with us? All our nearest and dearest and all that we've picked up in life. Do we leave it behind? Was it taken with us? Where is it? It's in here, isn't it? It's part of our sort of interior luggage. And when this is turned back and is let go and dissolves away, isn't the darkness diminished? The more one carries, the more one carries not only one's own burdens, but the world's burdens. Isn't the process magnified? Why is Christ called the great Redeemer? And what is Christ if not I am? Every time, for example, a situation arises which we may not like and we refrain from judgment, criticism, you see what happens? The potential aggro is diffused, isn't it? On the other hand, if we pick it up and make much of it, it's magnified. One of the first books on philosophy that I had as a young man was called Saints Who Moved the World. And this title intrigued me. I was only really just beginning to get interested in this work. And I read about St. Anthony of Egypt, who lived in a cave, and I liked that, and I read about St. Francis, who loved animals, and I liked that, and I read about one or two holy men in the Himalayas sitting up there, and I liked that. Anyway, it whetted my appetite. But I've always remembered the fact that these people who apparently did nothing, apart from, well, I didn't know what meditation was then, but just sat in a cave. I didn't understand what they were doing or trying to do, move the world, or so this book said. How could it be that, I was an action man then. How could it be that this work of whatever it was could be so effective? Of course, it's clear as crystal to me now. Maybe you too are getting a sense of it. That really we can do very little with our physical bodies. Pick up a few bits of rubbish and can't really do much else, can we? We can do a bit more with our minds, maybe influencing others. that when we surrender, of course it seems at first that we're surrendering to nothing, doesn't it? But in this room here now, what is really substantial? In other words, standing under, what is actually supporting this whole performance that you and I are engaged in? Yes, how can it possibly move the world? And yes, in a way, that's what I've said. It explains it, doesn't it? From the world's point of view, it just seems not gobbledygook, doesn't it? It makes no sense. You just get a taste of this stillness. And it does begin to make sense, doesn't it? And up on the hill, like we were yesterday, without any philosophy or talk of anything really. It just seemed very obvious, doesn't it? The world down there, a little bake with the traffic jams and the problems of the high street didn't seem to add up to much, did they? As a boy, I loved that verse from the Psalms, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh even from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. That's what seems to happen in the... I wonder if you're familiar with what's called the old traditional English Book of Common Prayer, 1662. There's something called a catechism, which was what young people were meant to learn before they became full members of the church. And one of the questions was what about the rituals of the church? And the answer was, they're all outward and visible signs of inward and spiritual grace. Outward and visible signs of inward and spiritual grace. It's worth remembering that, at least I find it is. Because human tendency is always to go into the outward and visible. That's where we feel comfortable. Normally, this is what we call reality, the outward and visible, which is really a sign of what is inward and spiritual. And the whole work is towards rediscovering the inward and spiritual origin of what is manifests as the outward and visible evidence out there in the world. And so, not surprisingly, in man's interpretation of spirit, the churches are packed with outward and visible signs of inward and spiritual grace. For example, the communion service, baptism, or everything that takes place is largely outward and visible signs of what is inward and spiritual. It was rather nice, actually, as we left the church yesterday evening, that woman, Judith, who likes to sing and play the piano, I thought was one of those people that didn't like me, but actually I spoke to her a few weeks ago and we suddenly made friends and discovered that it's not that we don't like each other at all, but we just sort of have never spoken before. And she immediately started saying nice things about us who had been sitting in silence, and now she's going to have a service which of course is full of singing and music and noise. And so we laughed about this and had a sort of sort of understanding that, as I said, it's like two wings of a bird. One is the noisy wing, the one that goes flap, 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 and the other is the silent one. You know, it's not that they're contradictory. They're just sort of, you know, like that. The outward and visible, and the inward and spiritual. You can say the whole world. You see, the whole world that we see and can feel is the outward and visible signs of, as we said yesterday, that invisible spiritual substance. Here it is, we're sitting in it now like fishes in the sea. Here is the, I suppose you could say that fishes themselves are outward and visible, they're sort of crystallizations of the water that they live in, aren't they? So we are the outward and visible sign of the inward and spiritual substance that we call spirit. So, yes, sin is naturally, in common understanding, sin has come to mean, you know, don't do this, don't do that, and in other words, Old Testament stuff. Whereas the inward and spiritual is more the New Testament stuff. That's really what it's all about. And, you know, again, what happens, organizations that lose that sense of the spiritual get hooked on the outward and visible and say, well, that's it, that's reality, that's what matters. Another word for spirit, which is very useful, is the causal world, you see. You can really substitute the word causal for spirit, largely. It's the causal world, it's where things begin. You can think of God as the original cause. It's where it all starts. The causal world. First cause. Cause and effect. We live in a world of effects. We try to change the world by manipulating effects, one against the other. But we've got to come back to the cause. Some people get the idea when they think of preventative rather than curative medicine, don't they? You've got to come back to the cause. Why do things go wrong? Why is the world in this predicament it is now? Why? What's the cause of it all? You won't cure the world by abolishing plastic. You've got to come back to the cause. And then the extraordinary thing is that once we stop, the less we try to control things, see. The miracle is that things happen naturally, don't they? The listening functions, doesn't it? The clock ticks. Spring's on the way. Doesn't Jesus say, take no thought for the morrow, but seek ye first the kingdom of God, which is this, of course. And then everything is added to you, everything is provided. Well, it's easier said than done, isn't it? But you can get the gist of it. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Your body still functions, your digestion happens, your blood, your breathing, your eyes blink. You don't have to do anything, do you? It all just happens, your hair grows. How does it happen? Let alone the world. River goes on running, doesn't it? We begin to understand that the only problem in the world is me. That's what gets in the way, isn't it? I am the great obstacle. I think that's why mantras are often favoured as a means of meditation, because listening to a sound is well, I won't compare different mantras. There are many ways of meditating, but there are endless layers of subtlety to listening. You can listen to the gross outer sounds, but the more you listen, then you sort of sink into deeper and deeper listening, don't you? So the mantra can correspondingly become subtler and subtler and subtler, deeper and deeper and deeper, ad infinitum. We talk of the voice of God, don't we? Rather naively, we try to translate that into words, don't we? But obviously there's something much deeper than that. This classic icon from Russia was given to me many years ago when I was in Russia. And I very, very often studied it since. Because so often in the West, representations of St. George show him as a muscular soldier saint with a military weapon, slaying the dragon and even blood flowing. Whereas in contrast, this icon, and also with big muscles, in contrast, this icon is completely devoid of all aggression. In fact, St. George's face is in total peace, serene. And then the spear is really a shaft of light. It's so fine, it's like a gossamer thread, almost nothing. And the horse itself just dances over the dragon without any impact, like a horse of light. And his whole demeanour is that of peace, completely no judgment or criticism. It is just to see them and realise it's just a shadow. There's no harm in a shadow, is there? A shadow is just away from the light. And what causes shadows anyway? Look, when I turn away from that light, my face is in shadow, isn't it? So I am the cause of the shadow, aren't I? When I turn back, where's the shadow? It's not seen, is it? Exactly. So the powers of darkness, that's all they are. So here you are. There's no need to fight them. One simply turns back to the light. And of course, here's the eye of God looking down. And there's the invisible hand to hold, the invisible friend to guide us. And put our trust in that. And then we don't hardly notice the powers of darkness. All we need to do is just see them. Look, that's just shadow. So there we are. It's the commandment of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount, you see, resist not evil. Because when we don't resist evil, it simply diminishes. But when you turn towards evil, what happens? It magnifies. We give it consciousness. You feed it with awareness. And that, of course, makes it get bigger. The moment you say something's awful, it gets bigger, doesn't it? It grows. You look at it and smile. It's less. All we have to do is try when we remember to put it into practice. Then all that we've been talking about this last 3 days becomes practical and real. We will forget, of course we will. We'll forget 5 minutes after we leave this room, but then we'll remember again. Try to remember.